Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. May 27th is one of those dates where history reaches for a grand idea and drops it directly on somebody's foot. Today we get Holy War turned inward, empires built on mud, war machines humbled by smaller forces, and modern culture discovering its monsters. Segment 1, and Holy Wars with bad customer service. May 27th begins in 1096 with the Mainz Massacre, when the fever of the First Crusade reached the Rhineland before most crusaders got anywhere near Jerusalem. Count Emicho of Leiningen led a violent peasant army convinced their sacred mission required attacking Jewish communities at home, because apparently the map to the Holy Land had a giant flashing detour marked bigotry. The Jewish community of Mainz had heard what happened in Worms and tried the oldest survival tactic in politics: pay the guy in charge and hope authority does its job. They gave Bishop Ruthard 300 pieces of silver for protection, and he sheltered them inside his palace, which sounds reassuring until you remember medieval security was often just a wall, a prayer, and one nervous bishop realizing he had sold the premium plan without checking the coverage limits. Emicho's forces broke through and murdered hundreds, possibly more than 1,000, turning crusading rhetoric into domestic terror. Then, in 1525, Thomas Müntzer was executed after the German Peasants' War, another case of religion colliding with power, class rage, and men holding sharp objects while claiming God had endorsed their newsletter. Müntzer preached direct revelation and sided with oppressed peasants against princes. But once the rebellion threatened the social order, the princes crushed it and made his body a warning sign. The pattern is ugly. Institutions often tolerate holy language until it points upward at the powerful. Aim it at minorities, and suddenly everyone is confused and underprepared. Aim it at nobles, and the state discovers same-day delivery for repression. Segment 2, and the empire needs a thinker and a swamp. Also on May 27th, 1332, Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis, into a world already warming up the disaster engine. His family had been displaced from Andalusia. He received an elite education, and then the Black Death killed his parents and teachers when he was a teenager, which is a childhood resume no guidance counselor can process. He became a statesman, diplomat, and court insider, meaning he got a front row seat to rulers making terrible decisions in expensive rooms. Eventually, he retreated to a castle in Algeria and wrote the Muqaddimah, developing the idea of asabiya, the social cohesion that lets tough, unified groups conquer comfortable societies before becoming comfortable disasters themselves. Basically, he looked at civilization and said, "Congratulations, you have invented the wheel, and it rolls downhill." Then jump to 1703, when Peter the Great founded St. Petersburg on the Neva Delta, a swampy, mosquito-heavy corner of captured territory that looked less like a capital city and more like nature filing a legal objection. Peter wanted a Baltic port, a window to Europe, and a European-style city that would drag Russia westward whether Russia packed a coat or not. He got it through autocratic will, forced labor, stone taxes, and brutal human cost. These stories talk to each other beautifully. Ibn Khaldun explained how empires rise, soften, and fall. Peter built a city as if architecture could bully that cycle into submission. One man studied power from the wreckage. The other built power on top of it. History, being rude, saved receipts for both. Segment 3, and underestimated forces rewrite the map. In 1863, the assault on Port Hudson showed the Union trying to crack one of the last Confederate strongholds on the Mississippi River. General Nathaniel Banks ordered a massive attack through ravines, felled trees, artillery fire, and Confederate defenses with all the hospitality of a bear trap with a flag. Tactically, it failed, and the Union settled into a long siege. But the assault mattered because black soldiers, including the Louisiana Native Guard, fought in direct combat for the United States in one of the war's early major tests of organized black regiments. Captain Andre Caillou led repeated charges, kept directing his men after being wounded, and became a symbol of courage powerful enough to embarrass anyone who had doubted black troops' bravery, which was, unfortunately, a large population of people with loud opinions and no recent experience charging into artillery. Then, in 1905, across the world, the Battle of Tsushima did something similar to global assumptions. The Russian Baltic Fleet sailed roughly 18,000 nautical miles to fight Japan after a voyage so cursed it accidentally fired on British fishing boats and at times on its own ships, which is less a naval deployment than a floating workplace incident. Admiral Heihachi Togo's Japanese fleet waited ready, organized and lethal. Japan destroyed Russia's fleet, proving an Asian power could decisively defeat a major European empire in modern war. In both Port Hudson and Tsushima, forces dismissed by the old hierarchy forced reality onto the battlefield. The world did not become fair afterward, because history hates clean endings. But the evidence was impossible to unsee. May 27th also gives us Dracula in 1897, the Chrysler Building in 1930, and the Golden Gate Bridge in 1937, which together feel like modern civilization looking in the mirror and saying, "I am terrified, but make it stylish." Bram Stoker's Dracula arrived in yellow cloth, not blood red, because apparently the first vampire branding meeting lacked commitment. The book used diaries, telegrams, ship logs, and newspaper clippings to make the supernatural feel documented, like Victorian society had accidentally invented the true crime podcast, but with capes. It fed anxieties about immigration, science, sexuality, disease, and the fear that empire might not always be the one doing the invading. A copyright mistake then put Dracula into the public domain in the United States, meaning Stoker's estate lost money while the Count gained immortality through endless adaptation. That is capitalism at its most gothic. The monster survives because paperwork failed. Then the Chrysler Building opened in New York, winning the race for the sky with a secret steel spire hoisted into place at the last minute. The architectural equivalent of hiding an ace in your sleeve, except the ace is 125 feet tall and Art Deco. 7 years later, over 200,000 people walked, ran, and roller skated across the newly opened Golden Gate Bridge before cars got their turn. Because Americans see a massive engineering achievement over violent Pacific waters and immediately ask, "Can I bring wheels?" The modern mood is right there. Build taller, span farther, document everything, and still invent monsters to explain why the future feels like it has teeth. The 20th century portion of May 27th is where giant systems discover they are not as invincible as the brochure claimed. In 1941, the German battleship Bismarck met its end after terrifying the British by sinking HMS Hood, then getting crippled by a torpedo from an old swordfish biplane launched from HMS Ark Royal. A massive battleship, one of the most fearsome machines afloat, was undone by a slow, fabric-covered aircraft that looked like it should be delivering mail to a lighthouse. Once its rudders jammed, the Bismarck could only circle in rough seas while the British fleet closed in, proving that sometimes the future arrives not as a shiny superweapon, but as one obsolete-looking plane hitting the exact wrong spot. In 1942, Operation Anthropoid targeted Reinhard Heydrich in Prague, one of the chief architects of Nazi terror. The mission nearly failed when Josef Gabčík's Sten gun jammed, but Heydrich's arrogance gave Jan Kubiš time to throw the grenade that wounded him. The assassination proved Nazi leaders were vulnerable, but the reprisals were horrific, with Lidice and Ležáky destroyed and civilians slaughtered in revenge. Then, in 2006, the Java earthquake killed thousands and left around 1.5 million people homeless, reminding us that catastrophe does not always arrive with a flag, ideology, or villain speech. Sometimes the ground simply moves beneath communities already made vulnerable by density, poverty, and weak infrastructure. The late lesson is brutal. Battleships, tyrants, and cities all depend on systems staying stable. And history keeps tapping the glass, asking, Are you sure that thing is load-bearing? In conclusion, May 27th is a tour through human certainty getting mugged by reality. Crusaders turned faith into terror. Reformers found the state had better weapons. Thinkers diagnosed empire. Rulers built on bones. Soldiers and sailors overturned old assumptions. Artists gave anxiety a cape. Engineers sold the future in steel. And giant machines learned humility from jammed guns, stuck rudders, and bad decisions. The date does not offer a neat moral. It offers a warning label. Every civilization thinks it has finally mastered power, fear, technology, and nature. And then history walks in holding a wrench and one very inconvenient receipt.